right, let's get to some football now, Sean. And I want to start with a rivalry game. Obviously, you're very familiar with it on several different levels. I've said all week, and I just believe it to be true, I just think there's a talent gap that maybe is underestimated by some. I just think it's that big. I anticipate Utah winning the game. I respect Kalani. I think he's going to have those boys ready to play. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Utah is going to win the game. And it's really funny. I got a column coming out on this for KSL next week about, the talent gap. When you look at it on paper, when you look at all of the measurables, size, weight, speed, how many of these guys are going to end up playing in the NFL, all that stuff, Utah has a very clear, distinct advantage in this rivalry this year and in this rivalry arguably for the last decade plus. But every single year, save, I guess, one, it's an extremely competitive game. It's a game where Utah's got to get a blocked kick or a converted fourth down or a fourth down stop or a late rally or whatever in order to come out with the win. And that's not to take anything away from the Utes because it's impressive to be able to do all that stuff in a rivalry game. But it's almost impossible to quantify what it is that BYU brings into this game every year because you're absolutely right, Spence. They realistically have no business competing with Utah as hard as they do year in and year out, and yet every year the game is up in the air until, the fourth quarter, sometimes late in the fourth quarter, sometimes the very last drive or the very last play. So it's fascinating to me that this game is still close. I mean, this is Utah's year to win the Pac-12 championship, a lot of people are thinking. And so for BYU, if you can even show respectability in a game like this, it's a huge achievement, but that's not enough for the Cougars.
Right. And in that vein, Sean, over the last couple of days, we've had Brian Keel on the show, John Beck on the show, and we'll chat with some former BYU players leading up to the game. And no matter how much they diminish this game, Sean, and you know this, they want it so badly. So, do you get the same feeling as you talk to people that you know in the business, just how bad these BYU former players and the fan base, they really do want this game?
Of course they want the game. They need the game, quite frankly, because to your original point, the gap continues to widen between these two schools in recruiting and all that stuff. And it's funny because I think for Utah, looking at the Pac-12 championship this year, you look at their roster, you look at the schedule, you look at the situation they find themselves in, and you say, okay, well, if not this year, when?
Yep.
And you also have to say the same thing about BYU potentially beating Utah. Well, if you're not going to do it this year, where you've got a pretty good offensive line, pretty good defensive line, where you've got an exciting young quarterback, where you've got maybe some talent with some transfer guys coming in to play running back for you, if not this year, when? Because the gap's just getting wider and wider, and I don't think that anyone's deluding themselves into thinking, oh, no, next year's BYU's year or next year's BYU's year. They need it now. So it's a really weird situation for both teams.
Do you think, and we kind of stumbled upon this the other day after we realized just how badly, like the Brian Keel interview kind of did it for us, do you think BYU fans would sacrifice the rest of the season if it meant beating Utah? Lose every other game if you beat Utah, even with that dog schedule over the last half?
Yes, I really think
right?
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and look, their schedule is crazy front-loaded, right? And then at the back half, there's not a lot of compelling matchups. But at the front of it, it's as good as a Power 5 schedule for the first half of the season. And you're trying to compete with these Power 5 programs, some of whom are on a real high right now, and you're trying to do it on a Group of 5 budget. You're trying to do it with the honor code restrictions, with the academic strictures of a place like BYU, and you're just punching way above your weight. And look, Kalani Sitake and the rest of that coaching staff are a bunch of really smart, motivating individuals. But there's a physics argument here. It's just you can't expect BYU to compete with that schedule. So if they get one win at the first game of the season at LaVell Edwards Stadium against a team that has been picked to win the Pac-12 and also happens to be their rival who they haven't beaten a decade, they'd go away happy.
What do you think, and I saw this up on your Twitter profile, and you can follow Sean, by the way, on Twitter, @RealOCSports, the poll that you had up about Kyle Whittingham. You know the man well. I don't get the feeling that he's close to being done, Sean. Then you talk to people that know him, and they say he's not going to be a football lifer. What do you put the over-under as far as how many years you think Kyle Whittingham has left as the coach?
Well, that's going to depend on if he wins a Pac-12 championship this year, I think, and if he wins a Pac-12 championship in the very near future. I think Kyle Whittingham is the kind of guy that will stick around as long as it takes to attain that goal, or stick around until the writing's on the wall that it's never going to happen. And that, I mean, Spence, that's a decade if it doesn't happen this year, right? So, I mean, he's a very healthy guy. He keeps himself in great shape. He's energetic. He's disciplined. And he is Utah football. So I hope he stays around for as long as he wants. I hope that he rides off into the sunset with hopefully multiple championships. But I think his longevity at the U is going to be largely determined by his success at the U. Does he check all the boxes? Does he find his way to a Pac-12 championship? And then does he set a new goal that he wants to get this team into a college football playoff? I mean, he is that kind of guy that he coached a Sugar Bowl team that proved they could beat anybody. I think he has expectations like that for his program. And because of the way that he conducts himself and he expects his players to conduct themselves, you know, they're a lot more realistic than they would be at a different school.
What do you think Kalani has to do this year, Sean, to get a new deal?
I mean, I think beating Utah would get him one right away. Against the schedule that we're talking about for BYU, you've got to beat probably 2 out of your first 4, and then you've got to finish with, 8 wins in a nice bowl game. But the most important is that front-loaded schedule. If you beat Toledo and South Florida and Boise State and Utah State, people are going to be excited about it. But if you get no wins against Utah, Tennessee, USC, Washington, I don't know that he's going to get a new deal.
Last thing, Sean, then we'll set you loose because I know you've got to go do your radio show in just a few moments. How do you analyze the Pac-12 as a whole? Is it Utah? Who's out of the South? Who's out of the North? Who do you think wins the whole thing?
I mean, I think Utah is clearly the favorite in the South. I think that's justifiable. USC is going to be good this year. I think teams like Arizona and Arizona State are probably going to be better than people are giving them credit for, especially Arizona, because healthy Khalil Tate is dangerous, and Kevin Sumlin and even UCLA, right? These are great coaches who now have a little bit of talent. I still think they're a couple years away from being the best versions of themselves as teams. So I think, like I said before, if not now for Utah, when? They're on a high. Everyone else is either kind of recovering or a little bit down. But the North is absolutely nasty. I always trust Chris Peterson to field really formidable teams. Oregon has maybe the best offensive line in the country, protecting a guy who may be the very first pick in next year's NFL draft, and they don't appear to have a lot of weaknesses aside from maybe their receiving core. So I think it's Utah and Oregon in a Pac-12 championship game, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Stanford as a big factor either. I think the North is a gauntlet this year, and Utah's schedule shapes up nicely for them to avoid a couple of big matchups there.
No doubt, man. Hey, thanks for the time today. Like I said, I'd love to be able to do this consistently throughout the year. Good luck today with your show, and congrats on everything that's going on, and we'll chat soon, okay? Be well.